If you're thinking about moving to Crofton, but you're not sure if you should either go rent or buy a home there, then this video is for you. So look, here's the deal. We already know Crofton is an amazing place to live. I mean, I love it. I actually rented like our first place there before we purchased a home in Bowie a little bit later. And it's just a really fantastic spot, right? I mean, you have the whole suburban lifestyle, great commutes. It's easy to get to Annapolis. It's easy to get to DC, get to Baltimore. You know, so many amenities down the road. It's just a fantastic place to live. Now, that being said, should you go rent there or you should go buy? Well, let's break it down and let's talk about it. The first obvious place we have to start with is what are your financial resources and like what are the financial concerns here on making this either purchase or renting. So on the renting front, you know, in Maryland, it's pretty common practice that they're gonna charge you the first month's rent up front as well as a security deposit. They can only charge you a maximum of 2 months of your rent for your security deposit. That being said, the majority of places, unless you have a pet deposit, is usually just going to be 1 month rent. So for really easy numbers here, let's say you're going to rent a place for $2,000. That means your security deposit would probably be also $2,000. So you're going to need at least $4,000 just to get in on a rental. Now, if you're coming from some other places like New York where they do first and last and maybe a security deposit, it's a little bit different here. We generally don't do that whole last month. And we also don't use the security deposit as the last month's rent. That is something that is, you know, people talk about that. You see it in the movies. It's not a thing here. The problem is if you use that last month or that security deposit as your last month's rent, the problem is what happens if you destroy the place? Well, now that security deposit is useless because you just use it just as your rent. So that's not a thing here. Again, it's usually just your first month's rent plus your security deposit. Now, not even getting into the monthly payments for the moment, let's just talk about money in, right? So let's compare that now on the purchase side. If you're purchasing a home here in Crofton, well, you're gonna have your down payment, of course, plus your closing cost. Now, in Maryland, it's pretty typical to have about 3.5% to 4% of the sales price will go towards your closing costs. Now, not to go too much into the weeds here, but your closing costs can be everything from your loan origination to getting all the title work done to your transfer taxes and some of the prepaid escrows like your taxes and stuff like that. Okay, so not only would you have your down payment, but then you have these additional fees. You can kind of thinking about like going to go buy a car, you have the sales price, but you also have all the tags, the title, and all that other stuff, right? So same kind of thing. So we need to plan for, let's say about, if you want to be conservative, let's say 4% for your closing cost. You may or may not be able to get that covered by the seller. That's a different conversation for a different video, but for right now, just know there's some extra money involved. Now, down payment wise, well, look, you know, a lot of people traditionally talk about putting 20% down, but not everybody has 20% down. Why 20%? Well, you can avoid mortgage insurance, which again is another topic for another video. But a lot of people buy a home with, you know, either 3.5%, or even 5% down. There are some really cool programs out there. Maryland has the Maryland Mortgage Program. They might be able to even get into the home with 0 down. So there could be options, but there's a huge range here, right? So instead of just your, you know, first month plus your security deposit, now we have 3 to 4% closing cost plus, you know, X% for your down payment. So the amount of capital that you need to get in a home is usually going to be much higher on a purchase than a rental. Now, I say usually, I have had situations, there are certain markets here where if it's more of a buyer's market, when you go to do this, well, then maybe you can get your closing costs paid for. And if you do a low down program or first time home buyer program, maybe you're not really getting with much money. Maybe you're just paying for like your home inspection or your appraisal. It does happen. Right now I'm shooting this video, it's a seller's market, so it's gonna be a little more expensive. All right, so let's just put that in perspective really quickly on the money front, because again, if the money does not make sense, then that's gonna answer your question. So let's say you're buying a $400,000 home. Let's say that you're getting an FHA loan. And so first your down payment is 3.5%. So, you know, 3.5% of 400, you're looking at 14K right there. And then again, I said, you know, 3 to 4% in there for your closing costs, depending on a few factors. So if your closing costs, let's just say, you know, it's another 15,000 or so, right? So you're basically just about 30K between your closing costs and your down payment. Now, again, maybe you can get some closing costs. Maybe you can get a gift from a family member. Maybe you can borrow against your retirement. maybe you already have that money sitting on the side. But the point is, that's like 30K right off the bat versus the other scenario was, maybe you're gonna have 4 or 6K. So a lot of money difference depending on the loan type and if you're able to get those closing costs covered. So on the money front, one thing that always comes up, is it cheaper to own or is it cheaper to rent? And look, this is kind of one of those questions that it's a little bit nebulous. And it's nebulous because there's a lot of factors. So for an example, if you own it and it's your primary residence, maybe you're writing that off for taxes, right? Or if you're renting, you can't do that. Now, interest rates also play a big part of that. What are the rates when you're purchasing your home and how much money are you putting down, right? So there are going to be situations here where it is cheaper to rent a home. Now, there's also situations where it's cheaper to own a home. Like for me personally and for my wife, like it is cheaper for us to own our home right now than it would be for us to rent it. It's just, that's the math, the rate that we have. I could not rent our home for what we pay in our mortgage. The next point that I always like to look at is, what is your timing? Like, are you going to live here for several years? So if you're going to be here for at least 3 years, then I think it's worth considering owning, right? Now, again, the financial piece has to make sense. But what I'm going to tell you is 5 to 7 years, unless the market shoots up or shoots down, if we just talk about normal like increase in sales prices and just appreciation, everything else, when you wrap in all of the cost of selling and cost of buying, all those things, 5 to 7 years is usually where people can sell their home and make a profit. So at 3 years, maybe you can break even, maybe it's really close, maybe you can do some sweat equity and make it more valuable, some different factors in there. But if you were to tell me, hey, look, I'm only going to be here for like 1 year or 2 years, like I'm on a job thing, it's just going to be a short little stint, unless you want to turn that property into a rental after and like rent that property out, then I'm going to say I would lean towards just renting for the year. Now, again, there are exceptions. Sometimes you can do some sweat equity, do something, maybe it's a great investment and you can flip it and all good. But for just normal homes that were, let's say, a little bit more turnkey, you want to be able to hold the home for a few years if you're going to purchase it. Otherwise, you could be upside down, not in terms of the sales price, but because of all the cost of doing anything when it comes to buying or selling. So that's just something that you have to put into the equation, is what is your timeline? Minimum 3 years is what we recommend. 5 to 7 years is where things really make good sense. Just kind of wrap up that conversation in a nice little bow. Think about this. If you got a place to rent at $2,000 a month, and mind you, a lot of places right now are more than $2,000 a month. But let's just say you got it for $2,000. And let's say you rented it for 2 years, that's $48,000 that you would have spent in rent. Like, that's kind of crazy town. I personally would rather spend that money towards my mortgage, and even if a lot of it's going to interest, there's still something that I'm probably going to get back that's going towards the principal, right? So that's one of the big factors here, is just how much money are you throwing away in rent? Is it worth it? Maybe it is to you. Now, the next pro and con that you have to consider is sort of the long-term wealth building. So let's pretend like your timeline works. You're like, hey, look, I'm going to be in Bowie for several years. I can afford the down payment. I can get closing help or do this or do that. And like, you're like, hey, this will work. One of the things I like about owning that you have to you want to put into consideration is long-term financial gains and also the financial tool. So what do I mean by that? Well, typically, like if you look at the last 100 years, homes usually appreciate. So if you buy a home today, in 10 years, it's usually worth more money, right? That's pretty sweet. If we look at most of the millionaires, other than some of the crypto stuff that's in the last couple of years, most of them own a lot of real estate. Like, real estate is one of those things where it's made a lot of people really, really wealthy. And if you have that home, that also means, and you gain equity, that also means you might better use it as a tool, like doing a home equity line against it. So for an example, let's say you buy a home today, and I don't know, in 10 years, maybe you have a kid who goes to college, or maybe you get hurt or lose your job, or I don't know, you want to add a pool or something, right? There's always something that you might want to do. Well, the reality is, if you have equity and you go get a home equity line, you can borrow against your own home in order to use that cash to do something. And that's pretty cool, because if you're renting, you can't do that. You can't be like, hey, I rent this home, let me use this as the collateral. It doesn't work that way. So I love the financial wealth and like that building and using that as collateral. I think is a big, big plus as far as ownership versus renting. Now, going back to timing, I'm going to say flexibility. So there's two different ways to think about flexibility. The first is flexibility to do what you want to the property. If you own it, you have that flexibility. Do you want to paint it? Do you want to put some shelves up? Do you want to change out the kitchen? Do you want to redo the bathroom, right? You have that flexibility because it's your home. So that is definitely a big feather in the cap if you own. Now on the flip side, maybe you need other kinds of flexibility. Maybe you need the flexibility, let's say you're moving to this area and you're like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to really like Crofton, or I don't know if I even want to stay in Maryland. Well, from that perspective, renting could be the stronger play because it's not a long-term commitment. I mean, it's long-term, maybe like a year lease or a 2-year lease or 3-year lease, but it's not like owning, right? So if you want that flexibility to like be able to skip town and just be like, you know what, I'm not feeling this area, I need to move. Well, that's where renting really, I would say I would encourage, not just because of that timeline that we talked about earlier, but because it's easy, right? Like your lease ends or you pay to break your lease and you're just like, here you go, clean the house, give them the keys, you're out. Pretty simple. Where if you own, now you got to do the home prep, now you got to sell, deal with all that stuff. So if you need that flexibility to move, renting could be something worth considering. One of the next points that people like to consider is the freedom to make the space your own. Like actually right here behind me, this crazy looking wall, this is actually my music studio that I built with a friend. And I couldn't do that if I was renting, right? Like I can build this room the way I want because we own the home. If you're renting, you don't have that luxury to really personalize the space the same way you would if you're renting. Whether that's painting, putting shelves up, redoing the kitchen, redoing the bathroom, putting a deck on, maybe even some of the landscaping. Like generally speaking, when you're renting, it is what it is, and that's what you got. So if you want that freedom to really customize the space, then that is a strong reason to consider owning. All right, the last point that I want to kind of talk about is really just the maintenance responsibilities. And I'm going to put this more in the pro on the rental side. So look, obviously, if you own the home, you're responsible, right? So if that roof starts leaking, that's your problem. If that stove breaks, that refrigerator breaks, the toilet's leaking, you name it, that's on you. So, it is one of those things where if you own the home, it's yours. It's your responsibility. Where you're renting, obviously, if you're negligent and you do something to, break the place sort of on purpose or whatever, or maybe they have a little deductible, okay, you're going to have some liability, right? But if you're just renting and, you haven't done anything and things are old and the roof starts leaking, in most situations, you're not responsible for that. If you, for example, just have a situation where you're like, look, I can't take on extra financial responsibilities. I need something that's just like stable for right now, a little safe harbor, the timing's gonna be quick. Well, that's where renting could be a really solid play because you don't really have to worry about any of that. Now, the downside is that also means you're not in charge or you don't have any control over what the owner or landlord decides to fix or not fix or how to fix it. So you might not like the things that they do or the way they address certain problems, but at least financially, you're not responsible as a general rule. Again, there's always exceptions to everything, but as a general rule, that, I'm going to put that as a nice perk to renting. So it is something to be mindful. I will tell you just as a little side note, there are home warranties out there that you can help to cover some of the financial burden of things. Like, for example, we have a home warranty on our own home. I can afford to fix the things, but financially, it makes more sense for me to have a home warranty. Like we have 2 heat pumps. We have enough things that the timing of them is cheaper for me to pay for that home warranty every year and pay the deductible and have that warranty to take care of those things when they break than it would be for me to just pay out of pocket. So, everything's case by case. Again, if that's a concern for you and you want to purchase, but you're worried about that, let's talk. We can have that conversation. Otherwise, again, nice little pro for the renting side. So in conclusion, really this is going to come down to what's your situation? What are you working with, both from a money, financial responsibility standpoint, and what is your timing? Basically, can you afford to go purchase a home? Will you be here long enough to get that appreciation? If so, for most people, going to the home purchase route is what most people are going to do and makes the most sense, financially, long-term wealth building, all that good stuff. If you're only going to be here for a short minute, then renting probably is the route to go. If you simply can't afford to purchase, well, that answers your question right there. Again, there's nuances in all of this. So my advice is if you're not quite sure, give us a call, shoot us a DM. Let's have a conversation. There's zero pressure either way. Happy to be a sounding board, learn more about your particular situation, and we can offer some thoughts, and then ultimately you get to decide what makes the most sense for you.